This is a drawing by Irma Murray. And I have to say, I thought, okay, this is a nice piece of work. I like it. It's a still life. It's a nice still life. But I kept coming back to it and looking at it a little bit closer. And the more I looked at it, the more I was drawn into the piece, because most artists, when you begin to learn to do art, you start with a pencil. And that pencil sometimes really helps you put down your ideas. And you often, after a while, abandon the pencil and move to other materials. You still come back to the pencil to sort of get and capture your basic ideas. In this particular case, Irma Murray, I gave her an award as an honorable mention because she stayed with the pencil. And this is very masterful colored pencil. When you look at this, okay, we've got a copper colander with strawberries in it, but you can get right up on top of those strawberries and they look like strawberries. All of these wonderful nuances in this reflective copper are wonderfully handled and look very, very realistic. And even the subtleties coming through here, particularly the way the light and shadow work across this this blue fabric, creates a wonderful, it's the Italian word, chiaroscuro, which means the interplay of dark and light. And this is, that interplay is very nicely done here. So I really want to compliment Irma on staying with the pencil and being so masterful in her work with pencil. This is a painting by Beth Menking. It's called Meadow, Texas. It's acrylic, but it's also acrylic on paper. I was really drawn, of course, to this because this has that sort of unconstable quality where you're drawn into the sky and you sort of lift your vision up of things that we're familiar with because we're creatures on the surface of the planet. And so getting your vision to come up and look at what's going on, I mean, we all do that. We all take our cameras out when we see that remarkable sunset or the pattern of clouds that is so different, it kind of, oh, I've got to record this in some way. And we're familiar, of course, in Texas and many other parts of the country where we see this wonderful variation, this whole idea of the work that picks up this wonderful abstract quality in which the paint just is so mixed together. And it's not until we get down here along the bottom that we begin to find those identifiable objects, that reality that ties us so closely to the earth with the highway and the telephone poles and a building off in the distance. But we know that rain and see that. And it's something we're familiar with, but I think very few artists are able to do such a wonderful job capturing this moment in the climate. This particular piece is an assemblage by Lisa Chittenden. And I found that this piece was a wonderful tie-in piece between all the works in the show that are two-dimensional and the works that are three-dimensional. This has a very two-dimensional quality until you come up to it and you begin to examine this wonderful layering and all of the different textures and objects that are put into this particular piece. All of the minutiae that is there were made up of various clock parts, little textures all coming together. There's a time quality to this theme. There's a key, there's the female face, all of those elements that are there that we can look at and say, there's a story here. What is that story? And in this case, Lisa's given us an opportunity to glimpse a story, a moment in a story, and it becomes up to us to sort of determine what the rest of the whole story might be. And so I found, again, this is a piece very inviting, very, very much drawing me in, certainly, into the work. This is a piece by Doug Busey. It's called Ribbon Bowl. I was drawn to not only the form, the sculptural form, but also to the surface and to the wonderful pattern work that is done on the surface. This is masterful inlaying, and once you manage to inlay all of these pieces of various types of wood together, I can sort of look at the yellow in here and say, well, that's got to be Bodart maybe, or something of that sort. You know, these woods that we're familiar with in Texas. But this patterning, and once you get these blocks put together individually, and then you have to rebind them together, reglue them, reclamp them to hold them down, and begin to shape something else out of that. I found that it was very, very easy to be drawn into this piece because you're sort of traveling around this endless ribbon. And it's certainly a piece you want to touch. It's a piece you want to pick up. You want to say, can I put this in another position? Can I wear it as jewelry on my arm? What can I do with this? And that delight, that invitation to experiment was one of the reasons I gave Doug an honorable mention for this particular piece. This drawing by Steve Gilbert Comfort Under the Ponciana is a colored pencil. And I was really fascinated by the fact that compositionally, it has a wonderful sophistication, clearly dividing what he's got on the top very differently than what's on the bottom. We've got this nature, this environment, this beautiful tree, the sky, but then we've got all of this human creation on the bottom. And the human creation puts out a plethora of pattern and color, all of these quilts, these rugs, these textiles that are hanging on a line here. And it's really, this bottom is so different than the top, but they work so well together. They work so well together, and I think because Steve has done a couple of very subtle things. He's continued the landscape through where we can't see it, and there are bits of it down here at the bottom. But then he's taken the shade that happens that this tree gives off, and he's repeated or made the shadow, picking up these natural forms and transferring them on all to the surface of all of these human-made textiles. And I looked at that and I thought, very interestingly done, because what color are shadows? Shadows are usually, we think of as gray. And there's a grayness here, but the grayness has to be carried through on top of all of these different colors. And I thought that there was a tremendous amount of work. So what do you do when you want to make something gray on top of a yellow, or on top of a pink, or on top of a red? Very, very difficult in terms of willing to experiment with that coloration. And I thought the piece had a wonderfully tied together, so I gave Steve third place in this particular exhibition. This piece is by Ariel Bowman, La Chaise Musicale. I love Ariel's whimsy, certainly. First of all, she has a tremendous sense of accuracy because she does the research into these extinct animals. And obviously here we have an early predecessor to a rhinoceros. But also also takes and makes that connection very personal for every one of us. We have all gone to something very nice, a nice event, a nice party, where at some moment we have committed a social faux pas. It may be a subtle thing like not using the right fork for dessert, or it may be something where we accidentally backed up and we broke something that was very expensive in this particular home. And so we're looking at this creature who has been playing musical chairs, and in the process has come around and suddenly sat on the piano stool, and in so doing has completely damaged the piano clavichord instrument. And this look of like social, just deer in the headlights, if there is such a look you can get by being, in a sense, a rhinoceros in a china shop. I think it's just wonderful that she captures that expressiveness in the face of this particular creature and all of the subtleties, because inside of this instrument are all of the classical elements of civilization. We can take a look at in this case, a piece of the classical Greek temple, other elements that are all there, and I think it has this wonderful human message, but it's a human message in which, oh, I'm glad that's not me, I'm glad it's somebody else, because now I can look at it and I can laugh a little bit at what's happening. When I said earlier that I felt like there was going to be an excellent example of many textile works in this show, I wasn't disappointed. There are many fine works here. And it seemed as though there was a group. And I was drawn to this particular work by Barbara Oliver Hartman. It's called Anomaly. And although it's completely soft work, she's taken and done a lot of treating fabric like paint. There are many fine subtleties in which there are nuances, change of color throughout this, making the overall pattern. But then the stitching is so complex, and there are such variables, little color variables all through the stitching. It reminded me of the wonderful pointillist painting, Sunny Your Afternoon at Le Grand Chat, that hangs in the Art Institute of Chicago, in which there are millions and millions of little dots of paint that are just dots that make up the entire image. And this complexity of little pieces of fabric, little different stitches, really, again, tremendously inviting. And then when you get back, you begin to see a much greater and the more overall design coming to life. And so this was, I think, probably for me, the wonderfully, most specifically example of how nicely the textile pieces were in this exhibition.